Hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today. Today's session is called Finding Your Flow, What Does It Take to be a Water Management Professional? And we're really pleased to be working in partnership today with the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology to bring you this webinar all about water management. Access to safe and reliable water is not only essential to human health and the natural environment, but it's also a key driver of economic and social development. In Canada, we face some really unique challenges around water, and that means water managers have to be innovative and adaptive in their management approaches. Today, we're going to be hearing from 3 of SAIT's experts who are going to explore some of the key attributes and skills you need to succeed in the water management sector. Before we start, I just want to take a moment to recognise the traditional Indigenous lands where EcoCanada's office is based here in Calgary. So at EcoCanada, we're committed to working towards a respectful acknowledgement, collaboration, and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples across Canada. This starts with acknowledging our honour and privilege to work and live in Treaty 7. Today we're presenting from Calgary, which is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. And we would also like to take this time to acknowledge the traditional territories and the oral practices of the Niitsitapi, which is home of the Blackfoot Confederacy. And this includes Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kiani First Nations. We also want to acknowledge the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bears Paws, and Wesley First Nations. EcoCanada is committed to increasing the participation of Indigenous talent within the environmental sector through our BEAR training program. The BEAR program's guiding principles are centered around respect, acknowledgement of Indigenous peoples' cultures, histories, legal rights, and also their relationship to the land. Since 2001, the BEAR training program has braided traditional knowledge with Western science and encouraged elders and knowledge holders to participate in the program. And this helps Indigenous communities to not only participate in, but also benefit from Canada's environmental sector. EcoCanada recognises the ongoing reality of colonialism in Canada, and we're committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and fostering a culture of respect for Canada's Indigenous peoples from coast to coast to coast. My name's Hannah Williamson, and I'm going to be moderating the webinar today, and I just want to run through a couple of quick housekeeping points before we start. So all of our participants on the line are muted. So if you have any questions or any technical issues, you can reach out to me using the questions to staff, and I'll do everything I can to try and solve your issue quickly. If you experience any issues with audio or connectivity, I suggest leaving the call and joining again, and that tends to resolve most issues. This session is being recorded and will be sent to you on demand within 24 hours, so you can watch the video as many times as you like. Questions are also encouraged. We have 3 fantastic speakers today from SAIT, and we are going to have some dedicated time at the end of the presentation where you can put your questions to the speakers. And don't worry, if we run out of time, we don't get to your question, we'll make sure we take that offline and get your response as soon as possible. And finally, we're going to just submit a short survey at the end of the webinar today, so please do take a couple of minutes to let us know what you thought about today's session, if there's anything you'd like more information on, or what your ideas are for future sessions. Just a little bit about EcoCanada before I introduce our speakers today. We are the steward of the Canadian environmental workforce. We champion the end-to-end career development of environmental professionals, and we have an in-house research team who identify and address labour market gaps. Everything we do at EcoCanada is geared towards driving and promoting sustainable economic growth and ensuring that environmental care and best practice is always a priority in everything that we do. On to the good stuff, introducing today's speaker. I'll introduce all 3 speakers up front, and then I'm going to hand over to Nisha, who's going to take it away with the first presentation. So first up, our first speaker is Candice Young-Rojansky. Candice is a passionate environmental health engineer who specializes in drinking water treatment in low resource settings. She has worked for various different industries, including government, consulting, engineering, oil and gas, the charitable sector, and also academia. Candice joined the SAIT Integrated Water Management team 2 years ago and is one of their core instructors. Our next speaker that I'll introduce is John Fennell. John has over 30 years consulting experience in the natural resource sector, and he's worked both internationally and locally with government and industry to better understand the risks associated with human development. John also supports SAIT's Integrated Water Management Program as an expert in residence. And our final speaker today is Nisha Midha. Nisha is a project management a project manager and water resource planner with a wide variety of skills and experience. So she's over 8 years experience working in consulting, municipal government, academia, and the charitable sector. Nisha has been working at SAIT to help them build a brand new integrated water management program and is one of their core instructors. I want to welcome all three speakers today. I'm really excited to hear the presentation, and I'm going to hand over to Nisha now, who's going to kick us off.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So hello, everyone. My name is Nisha, as was just introduced. I'm one of the instructors in SAIT's Integrated Water Management Program. And today I'm going to introduce everyone first to why we use the word integration when it comes to water management. So I'm going to be helping to lay this kind of groundwork for my two other colleagues who will kind of speak more to specific challenges faced in the water field and kind of associated opportunities that we see. Okay, so just a brief outline. So I'm going to talk through, what even is a watershed, and then I'll touch on that piece of what does integrated water management really mean, and then I'll suggest some of what I think are kind of key hard and soft skills for working in this field of integrated water management. So first of all, what is a watershed? Really a watershed is the entire landmass over an area that drains into one body of water. And the boundaries of a watershed are defined by the highest points over all of that land. So everybody lives in a watershed, including myself, where I'm based in Calgary, and we're in the Bow River watershed. And so this starts in Bow Lake in the Rockies, and it drains east, including major cities like Banff and Calgary. And all that water eventually joins the Oldman River from the south, and then becomes the South Saskatchewan, and it flows across Saskatchewan and Manitoba and exits into Hudson Bay. So this map you can see here is in light yellow is the Bow River watershed, which is actually part of a larger watershed called the Saskatchewan River watershed. So within any given watershed, it's also kind of important to remember that there's different ways that water is moving around. The easiest way to look at this or visualize this is through a water cycle that we can see here. So, while we typically see lakes or rivers nearby us, which are really kind of easy to imagine water flowing through, we have to remember that there's also evaporation occurring. There's precipitation in the form of rain or snow, and we have water constantly moving also in soil and groundwater underneath us. So really, this is just to remind us all that there's this kind of complexity to the way that water moves before we even start to consider our own human influence on top of it. So why does this all matter? If we were just to manage a lake or a river and aquifer alone without considering all the different things that they interact with, we would be missing a lot. But when we consider the whole watershed, we realize that the water is being shared with many groups of humans, but also wildlife and plants. And within a watershed, there's multiple industries like agriculture and also parks and natural spaces. So thinking in this kind of watershed frame helps us to remember that water supports many human uses outside of just, the water that we drink. It helps us generate electricity from hydroelectric dams. It helps us provide irrigation water. And, many of us recreate and base our livelihoods off this water as well. So I introduced what a watershed is because it's a really natural way to manage water. And as I said, looking at this entire landscape allows us to understand all of the different overlapping demands and how much supply there even actually is for everyone. In this field of water management, there's a large shift occurring where integration is understood to be essential now. But what do I really mean by this? So integration is really, to me, about dropping divides between different specialists or different backgrounds and integrating these various groups to our advantage. So the best way we can try to manage water is to amplify the voices of all these different parties and really actively incorporate these perspectives into our decision-making around water. And while integration across these different groups, sounds great on paper or on the slide, it's not actually as easy to implement in practice as one might think. In our society, we have created these, nice, neat little boxes so that we all have a place to belong and to operate within. And that's great. But again, breaking down these barriers and moving towards integration has to be a little bit intentional. So I'm going to introduce to you some of the key kind of soft skills and hard skills that I think would help someone to find that integration in water management. And I hope that this starts to kind of help showcase to you either skills that you can begin to work on for yourself, or to add to your toolbox if you'd like to succeed in this field. So first of all, it's really important to be able to understand various values or mindsets and make space for them and respect them. Water can be really personal, and it's connected to culture or history or business for many people. So we need to be able to respect this relationship. And then once you're able to make space for other values, using skills to communicate these with differing perspectives and finding common ground is imperative. Unfortunately, sometimes conflict arises, and because water is so deeply necessary for so many of us, being trained or skilled at conflict resolution, I think, is also important. Another soft skill that I think I would recommend is being able to conduct strong research from a variety of sources and form an opinion based on that research. We're all in an information age. We can't just kind of take the first piece of information as fact, right? Another key skill is knowing the regulatory regime that you exist within and operating within that. So having that sense of place can dictate what is allowed, but it can also help you to, budget or allocate time to ensure a plan you make to manage water is actually compliant with legislative frameworks. And then finally, knowing that things can change very rapidly in this water management field, and being adaptable and having the ability to, or willingness to accept change, I find is an important soft skill. And so here I've listed some of, many hard skills that I think would really help out a water management professional. And John and Candice, right after this, are going to kind of speak to some more specific skills, such as related to climate change and contaminants. And this list, isn't exhaustive, so I'll speak to some of them. So one of them is that we really see that water management professionals need to be able to manage a project and understand risks that may arise during the project, not only to a project schedule or budget, but also risks that could occur to the surrounding environment or by the surrounding environment. So for example, flooding or drought. Being able to properly assess different hazards and prepare plans to respond is a very real part of this field. There's also a lot of working with different types of data. So that data could be collected in the field or precipitation data from a hydrological station or spatial GIS data. So being able to manipulate this data and kind of derive trends is, I think, increasingly advantageous. And then of course, a large aspect of this work is getting your feet wet, like in this picture. So one of the best ways to gain an appreciation for the complexity of water is to do those field assessments and take those measurements yourself. So that's it for me. To finish off, here's a picture I took of our students doing some water quality sampling at SAIT. I love this, working in this field of integrated water management, and I hope this has helped you to start to understand a little bit more about what it entails to work in this field. I look forward to chatting afterwards, and I'll pass it off to Candice.
Oh, thank you, Nisha. This is like passing the baton. Now I've got the baton. I'm going to talk to you now about contaminants of emerging concern, which is a pretty interesting topic, I think. So to start with, what is a contaminant of emerging concern? These are called, sometimes you might have heard of them as micropollutants, that's another term, or contaminants of concern, or CECs. These contaminants are products, chemicals that are unregulated. They're not systematically monitored or reported, but they're thought to have some potential for harm to the environment or to human health. However, perhaps there's not enough research yet, which is why that emerging word comes in. So we're not yet at that stage where we're monitoring it systematically, but there might be some negative effects coming from that contaminant. Some examples of these type of contaminants might be pharmaceuticals. Now, pharmaceuticals might be medications or they might be illicit drugs. Personal care products. Personal care products can include different types of cosmetics or different types of surfactants or soaps, or products within them. So I think there are a lot of like facial scrubs, which include microbeads. Microbeads aren't necessarily removed in wastewater treatment plants and might make their way through the environmental system. This could be an example of a micropollutant or a contaminant of emerging concern. Industrial chemicals, some of them are controlled, but some of them are not. And examples of contaminants of emerging concern in that industrial sector are things like flame retardants. Disinfection byproducts can be contaminants of emerging concern. So different treatment processes used to purify water might actually change the nature of some of the existing substances in the water in a way that the effects aren't fully known or understood. And nanoparticles are a contaminant of emerging concern. So why aren't these monitored? One reason might be that the contaminant itself is relatively new. If it's relatively new, there might not be a lot of information about the effects of this contaminant on the environment. Another reason though, because some of those things that I listed, especially some of the medications, are known to have endocrine disrupting effects. So you might have heard of them before. And I learned about them 20 years ago in my undergraduate degree. So how are they still emerging if they're not a relatively new contaminant? And that might be because there's been insufficient detection and analytical methods up to now in order to control these contaminants. It might be that they're present in such low amounts that there isn't a cheap and relatively dependable way of assessing these contaminants. So these contaminants, they're different types. There are types that enter the wastewater stream directly. So an example might be different soap products. You wash your clothes, those materials go directly into the wastewater stream. Or they might be contaminants that first go through your body and are excreted. So an example might be caffeine. It's something that I know I've had about 5 cups of coffee this morning. My body will be excreting caffeine, and that's going to enter the wastewater stream. And these might be excreted in nearly the same form that they were taken in, or your body might metabolize them, and the product that's excreted into the wastewater stream might be quite different from the product that you actually first took. There are also chemical and biological reactions in the environment. So it might be that wastewater, or I'll say the step before the environment, in the wastewater treatment plant, there might be different reactions that this contaminant goes throughout that process, so that what's leaving the wastewater treatment plant is different again from what was entering. Or it might be that in the river, in the receiving water body, there are chemical and biological reactions which change the nature of that product. So what we're interested in when we're talking about contaminants of emerging concern might be the parent compounds, but it might actually be the transformation products that we're interested in. So for example, when we're looking at disinfection byproducts, chlorine has a famous disinfection byproduct, the trichloromethanes. We might not be interested in the amount of chlorine in the discharge water. We're interested in the level of this new product, in the discharge water. So why is it that these are in the waterway? All of our wastewater goes through wastewater treatment plants, doesn't it? Doesn't that clean out our water? Yes and no. Our wastewater treatment plants weren't designed to remove different medications, for example, different pharmaceuticals. They're designed to remove carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus. They're not designed to remove all of these different chemicals that might not have existed in the past, or which are very specialized. Now, from industrial products, industry is unlikely to spend a lot of money when a chemical is unregulated. That's not to say that all industry is evil, but when we're talking about contaminants that might be in, say, the parts per billion range and are unknown to have, you don't know whether or not they truly have a negative effect on the environment, there's not much motivation to spend billions of dollars to create a new process to remove it. Another issue which makes it a little bit complicated is that these contaminants of emerging concern often associate themselves with sediments. And by associating themselves with sediments, they might not be big problems most of the time in certain communities. However, a large flood event might disturb the sediments and move those contaminants further downstream. This is one of the reasons why climate change might be increasing our interest in some of these contaminants of emerging concern. With an increase in the number of large flood events, we might have increased transport of some of these contaminants. So some of the reasons why these contaminants of emerging concern are interesting is that they tend to have high persistence. So there are measurable quantities in underwater sediments, measurable quantities in aquatic insects. They move up the food chain. If they're measurable, if we know that there are quantities of these contaminants in different invertebrates on the bottom of a river living under the rocks, then we can assume that they're going to be present also in fish, and then later in predatory wildlife. So they make their way through the entire ecosystem. Also, we're becoming more and more interested in wastewater reuse as a way of using less water, of removing less water from the ecosystem. Now, this wastewater reuse might be in indirect ways. We might be using it for irrigation, say we're irrigating a forest or something, or it might be in direct ways. I have some beer here given to me as a gift from Nisha, which is actually directly made using wastewater effluent. And there are places that are looking at using wastewater effluent as drinking water. So that's direct wastewater reuse. And so we're interested, if I'm drinking somebody else's wastewater, am I drinking the medications that they also took? Also, another interesting thing is the legalization of cannabis. How much of that ends up in the water? How much of that am I consuming if I'm consuming somebody else's wastewater? And on and on and on. So what are some of the consequences? Up to now, investigations into fish and amphibians downstream of urban environments have shown lower gonad size and sperm motility, which leads to decreased reproduction of these organisms. Now, amphibians are a pretty good indicator of water quality, and so seeing these effects on amphibians indicates that something's not quite right. However, it is very difficult to kind of connect these effects that we're seeing on amphibians or on fish with a particular contaminant. So we're seeing these effects, and we're seeing these effects generally downstream of urban centers, and especially where there's wastewater, domestic wastewater influx and industrial wastewater. But it's difficult to pull this apart. Which chemical is causing which effect? We have a cocktail of things that are entering the wastewater stream. It's not just person X's birth control pill, but it's person X's birth control pill plus person Y's heart medication plus person Z's new facial mask, All of these things together are entering the wastewater stream. We don't know which of these is having the effect. We don't even know if it's maybe the effect is caused by a mix, only if 2 of them are present rather than 1. These things just aren't known. Another issue is that they tend to have very, very low concentrations in the wastewater effluent. And these very, very low concentrations are difficult to analyze and assess. Also, ecosystem effects. These tend to be observational studies, and it's very difficult to develop causational relationships. What's causing these effects within the ecosystem, and to actually say it's this, because there's so many different ways that humans are affecting the environment. Do we know it's this particular medication or this particular chemical that's leading to that? Or maybe it's completely other effects caused by urbanization. So there are lots of jobs in this field. If you go to Eco Canada's website, I saw they've got great job information there. There's water quality monitoring, water and wastewater treatment plant operators. You've got chemical lab technicians. You've got jobs in all levels of government, consulting, the not-for-profit sector, looking at advocacy, so pushing for policy change, but also for public instruction. So things like the Yellowfish Road program. If you've ever seen yellowfish on your stormwater drains, that was started by community advocacy groups, or trying to encourage people not to flush their old medications down the toilet. That would be about informing the public and leading to behavior change. So thank you very much. It was great to have this opportunity to talk to you about a topic that I find super interesting. I'm handing it off to John now.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. And I obviously get to pick the least controversial topic here, but I'll be talking about climate change and our future water security. And as the tagline says there, it's time to get it right, because what I'm finding throughout my particular career is that climate change is often misunderstood and underrepresented in a lot of the things that we do. And so this is more just to try to get everybody on the same page and thinking about, okay, what does our future have to hold for us, and how would we respond to that? And as a community of practice, what are the things that we can do? So I think it's important to differentiate between what climate change and what climate variability is. Climate variability is that interdecadal to longer term fluctuations in the Earth's climate patterns and cycles. So some of you might be familiar with the El Nino Southern Oscillation, or the El Nino La Nina cycles, or the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. These have ramifications for the water balance in our part of the world, Western Canada. If you go to Eastern Canada, you have the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. So there's all these different climate forcings that drive our interdecadal fluctuations. But climate change is a bit different. It's a shift. It's a shift in the global or regional climate patterns over a long period of time. And these can be due to natural manifestations of our planet, or human induced. And you'll hear about the greenhouse gases emissions and things like that are driving global warming. That's part of it. There are some natural things that do occur, but all of these added together lead to a warming world, and that has ramifications for our water systems. So how does climate change affect things? I'm just showing you some information from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that kind of captures it quite nicely for me. When you think of the climate, it's kind of like a bell curve, where when you're in average conditions, you're kind of in the middle of the bell curve, and when you're in extremes, you're at the tails. And what climate change affects is what's going on at the tail end. So those are the extremes, the 10th percentile at the low end, the 90th percentile at the top end. And when we have a change in the mean, so we have a change in the mean temperature, you can see how that in the upper left-hand side, how that bell curve shifts. And you can see that the extremes occur much more at the high end. This is a temperature example here, but same thing with precipitation. That's with the shift in the mean. If you shift the variance, you see a very similar thing. You see a more decrease in the extreme variance and a more broader variance across the system, but which increases the probability of extreme events happening at the tail ends again. And so when you put this all together, you change in the mean and the variance, you can see that you can have extreme events that are going to projected to occur much more frequently. And so these are the types of events like the droughts or the floods that are occurring at the extreme ends of the bell curve of climate that we really need to focus on and I guess understand how that influences the decisions that we make when we're thinking about infrastructure or things that we're in the environment that we need to consider. So this is all very, very important. So one other last aspect of this is in a warming world, the atmosphere can hold more moisture. For every increase of 1 degree Celsius, the atmosphere can hold up to about 7.5% more moisture. Now, what goes up must come down, and that really depends on where you are. And we're starting to see a redistribution of the global water, atmospheric water, because of how the conditions in the atmosphere are changing. When you think about this, it's very much like a river. A river in the mountains has a very steep gradient going from high elevation to low elevation. So when you think of that, you can think of it in temperature, the gradient between the equator and the poles. If it's steep, which means that there's a big differential of temperature between them, that will influence how the jet stream works and how the storm tracks work. But very much like a river, when the river comes out of the mountains and goes onto the prairies and flattens, it starts to wander a bit more, as opposed to the very predictable channels coming out of a mountain. This is the similar thing for the jet stream. We're starting to see the jet stream wandering a bit more. It's slowing down. Storms are spending more time over areas and dropping more moisture. And so this is, we've seen some of these examples of these extreme events that we've been having over the last few years. And so this redistribution of moisture and how the jet stream is manifesting itself is leading to some of the events that we're seeing. Now, the past is the key to the future. We know that we've gone through cycles in the past. This is looking at a tree ring reconstruction of moisture balance in southern Alberta, water availability, and it's depicted as the Palmer Drought Severity Index. So we don't have to get too deep into the details here, but at the top end, and you see those shaded blue colors, those are looking at moisture excess. And so when you're starting to get out to the extremes in the values of 2+, those are your moderate to severe events of moisture. And conventional wisdom says that if you're living in a wetter period, the chances of floods are higher. And so you can see that there have been periods of 20 or 15 to 20 years where we've had very wet periods, and that would of course lead to more flooding risk at those times. On the flip side, we have the drought or the deficit side of it. And equally, this is quite disturbing, particularly in this area where we've seen periods of 20 to 30 years of water deficits. And we know that water deficits lead to challenges in the hydrological systems. We can have agricultural droughts, meteorological droughts that will only last maybe a year or two, but we can actually get into much longer term droughts that can influence the water balance severely in our systems of how humans access water, how nature accesses water. And so it's important to know what's happened in the past to give us a window into what could potentially happen into the future. And when we pile climate change on top of this then it leads to those increase in those extremes. And so when we're thinking about planning into the future, planning our infrastructure, how are we going to respond to this? How are we going to build adaptability into the system? We certainly need to look at the past to give us an idea of what could potentially occur in the future. Now, it all depends on where you are, of course. There's a geographic component to water stress, and this all has to do with, you know, seasonal variability. So as we know, seasonal variability is increasing. We're starting to see longer summers, shorter winters. That's influencing how the water in our system is distributed. And geographically, in the center of Canada, we know that the provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan are some of the driest parts of our country. And water stress is high in those parts, but it may not be equally distributed in each basin. And that depends on the supply and the demand. And so when we look at it from this perspective, we can have an idea of where the pinch points will be in the future, and we can I guess design our systems or our policies or our management systems around that. And so taking this all into consideration with a forward-looking optic is really important. So again, when does this water happen in the season? That's changing as well. I'm showing you on the left-hand side here a graph that I just took from the eastern slopes that's showing the projections for changes in the seasonality of precipitation, which is a lot of the water that we see in our rivers infiltrates into the groundwater, into aquifers that we access later on. But you know, this is an important factor to understand. What that graphic is showing is the projections under two of the well-known climate scenarios, the representative concentration pathways 4.5, which is kind of a middle of the road scenario, or the 8.5, which kind of worst case scenario, but they're very similar with respect to precipitation. You see that we're tending to project that we'll get more precipitation earlier in the season. This could be you know, earlier snow melt or rain on snow events, or winter precipitation as rainfall, because our climate is warming, which then can increase the risk of flooding earlier in the year. Equally, on the other side, later in the year, we see a decrease in precipitation. And this can lead to lower stream flows and more stress on the ecological systems that rely on that. So on the right-hand side, you see some work done by David Soshin and others on the projections of how this is going to influence stream flow, a percent change. And think of it this way: the 100 at 100, that line is the baseline, and so this is a change in baseline from the 1961 to 1990 baseline. And under a number of different scenarios, you see some significant increases in stream flow, sometimes up to more than 200% of a change. And so that is extremely significant. That water is going to be coming down, and we're going to need to be able to handle it and deal with it, or make sure that people aren't in harm's way. And certainly as we get later into the season, we're seeing decreases in base flow of anywhere from 10 to 50%. And so understanding how the seasonality is going to influence when the water occurs in the system is equally important as understanding when these extremes can occur. So we hear often about return periods. It's a 1 in 10 event, or it's a 1 in 50 event, or it's a 1 in 100 event, and that's great. It's telling us about the probabilities of when these events can occur and what their magnitude might be. Now, with climate change, what we're seeing is a shift in the return periods. As the quote says, it's a numbers game. What is a 1 in 100 today is now being projected to be a 1 in 50 event in the future. And these types of paradigms are not being well accommodated into the engineering and geoscience community. So the work that was done here by folks in Alberta, Akuo and others, looking at how this these return periods can manifest themselves over the next 100 years. We're seeing the median risk for short-term storms, increasing. They're projected to increase up to 37 to 38% respectively for a 25 and 50-year projects. That's significant change. And so these are the types of things that need to be built into our projects going forward with a no regrets policy. If we're going to design these things and we're going to oversize culverts or things like that, for an example, we shouldn't be concerned about, that cost, because if we don't do that, the cost is going to be much greater down the road. So really understanding how these return periods are going to change things in the future is extremely important. And this is what we're seeing. We're seeing how the disaster trends are increasing. And the image on the left, from the insurance people, the public health and safety people, is showing that flooding is actually one of the major events that's starting to occur more. And behind it, we are seeing heat waves, things like that. On the right-hand side, that reflects in the costs of insurance claims. Those are going up as well. And so understanding, how these trends are manifesting themselves and how climate change and climate variability is driving a lot of this is extremely important, because it is reflecting into the cost of our insurance, the impacts to our gross domestic product, and so on and so on, and the health and safety of our population. So it's obvious that flooding is posing one of the greater risks in the short term, but drought has greater economic impact going forward. So these two extreme events are driving a lot of what's happening in our country. And certainly in Canada, where we're rarely are we on average, and we're more somewhere in the extreme ends of the bell curve, this is important to understand. So this insidious threat of drought to water security is the one that is of biggest concern. Obviously, droughts pose more threat to sensitive sectors, agriculture being one of them, but it's also connected to our economy, our environment, and society that relies on water. Droughts are one of the trickiest hazards to forecast. There's a lot of different things that are happening that drive droughts, these mega patterns in the atmospheric shifting of air, and how the oceans are connected to the land and what we're doing on the land. These are complex feedback mechanisms. And droughts are projected to increase in frequency and intensity in the future as the climate continues to warm. This is going to lead to severe impacts. And I'll show you an example after this. But better understanding, better forecasting, better monitoring, better preparation, early warning, and development of adaptation strategies is required. And so this means that this is a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary approach to managing drought as it goes forward. So we need to be able to forecast this better and understand how we're going to respond to this, how we're going to manage our water systems to get our way through, make sure that there's enough for people, the environment, and our economy. The example I pick here is the last great drought event that we had in 1999 to 2005, which occurred mostly in the prairies, but it extended across from BC all the way to the Atlantic provinces. It was a massive, impactful event. It was one of the greatest intensity events that occurred in Canada's history, and it was mostly concentrated in southern Saskatchewan and Alberta. And what it resulted in was considerable damage or interference with agricultural, environmental, and economic activities. It impacted the core of that drought that occurred in 2001 to 2002, influenced our gross domestic product by $6 billion. That's a big number. And most of that was focused in the prairies. $3 billion of GDP reduction was realized in the prairie provinces. And so that is significant. when you think about it. And if you go back to that slide I showed you before, that tree ring reconstruction, we've had bigger droughts before. We've had droughts that have lasted, 20 to 25 years or more, mega droughts as we call them. And so that, when you start thinking about that, that could have unbelievable ramifications if we're not prepared. And so I just thought I'd show you the image on the right-hand side. This is where we're at right now with our drought scenario in Canada as of May 31st. You can see that in southern Manitoba, parts of Saskatchewan, but extending down into the States, you're starting to see some major droughts happening in the breadbasket area. Even worse so down in the California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. They're actually in a sustained drought in that area right now. So you can see that there is some patterns to this, some geographical distribution of drought, and it moves around. So understanding how this happens and why it happens and how we can adapt to this is really important. So really, despite our good intentions and our efforts to mitigate greenhouse gases, we're still seeing increasing trends. What I found very interesting with this graphic is that when we have major events like wars or energy crises or pandemics for that matter, that actually causes our greenhouse gas emissions to go down because we're using less. Right now, the economy was shuttered for a year. You see at the top end of that graph how the greenhouse gas emissions went down. However, that doesn't mean it's going to stay that way because we're creatures of habit. We like to get back to normal, and the expectations are is that the fossil emissions are going to rebound back. They may not be on the same rate of trajectory because we are bringing in mitigation strategies globally, but we're still on an increase. And so with that increase comes the increased risk of continued global warming. So that leads to significant costs, economic, environmental, and social. And really, arguably, there's no part of our world that will be spared from this. And so we need to realize that if we're going to continue on the trajectory, that we're going to have to adapt. And as a species on this planet, we've shown that we're quite good at that. But we should be mitigating as much as possible. So really, not accommodating climate change into future planning is dangerous and arguably irresponsible and will lead to unintended consequences. So we need to take a different approach if we're going to manage our way through this challenge. And this is through integrated thinking. This is like working together to solve these types of problems. And despite the uncertainty with climate change, I think it's important that we take a precautionary principle and a no regrets policy to this, to avoid these unintended consequences. And that should be one of our goals as a society, as a community of practice. So the need for water practitioners with integrated thinking skills, knowledge of climate change risks has never been greater. And so the opportunity in this space is immense. We just need to open up our minds and we need to broaden our thinking. And we need to bring in a lot more of these disciplines and educate ourselves towards this. So the opportunity is here to secure our water future. And in doing that, we need people like you out there to learn more about how climate change impacts our water systems. That's very, very important to understand the how of it. We also need to understand how that affects the things that are connected to water, because everything arguably is connected to water. Our economy is driven by it in this country. The health of our people, of our ecosystems, and the well-being of our watersheds are all connected to water. And so we need to understand how that water flows through our system, how we're using it. The concept that a hydrated basin is a healthy basin is very, very important. Applying that knowledge to our current management practices, our forecasting, our monitoring, and our mitigation is equally important. And ensuring that all of this, everything that we learn, everything that we do, we pay it forward through education, like the SAIT program and other programs like it in Canada, raising awareness and taking action. Because in the end, we are the only solution to this. And so it's important that we remember that and we hold that dear. Thank you.
Thanks to John, and thanks to all of our speakers today. What a fantastic presentation. You know, water is something that you often take for granted. It just comes through the tap, and there's so much in the whole industry behind it. So it's been really interesting to get that glimpse today. And we're now going to have some time for questions. So please use the chat box and select questions for staff. Let me just stop sharing so we can see everybody. But the first question is, to each of our panelists, how did you get started in the water management field?
Nisha?
Yeah, sure. Maybe we can just go in the same order. So how I got started, I started in biology. I had kind of a general interest in all things environmental biology, and so I worked in consulting for a number of years, doing a lot of field work and for oil and gas projects primarily. And then I always had this underlying interest in water and was really passionate about it, and I could see that in the types of field work I was doing. And so I decided to do my master's in water management specifically. And then I knew I wanted to kind of explore how different people use water and in different contexts. So I worked in a couple of international kind of not-for-profit settings. And then a little bit later, I arrived at SAIT, and it's been a really fun journey. So that's kind of how I got started in this water field.
Fantastic. Candice, do you want to go next and tell us how you got started?
Well, I come from the Cold Lake region, and so I've always been in love with water. I know when I moved to Calgary to do my undergraduate degree back in the late 90s or mid 90s, I found it disturbing that there was so little water here in southern Alberta. But I think my real passion came. I actually quit university after my second year. I later came back and I moved to Kenya for a year. And while I was there, where I was living, we went through a period of drought, or there was a period of drought. And one of the consequences was that we only had access to a bucket of water for a bucket bath once a week, and understanding how that impacted my quality of life and the quality of life of my friends and colleagues. And I had a friend who had amoebic dysentery who was staying in a bunk bed across from me. And so I got to watch that whole process of dealing with a terrible, terrible disease that's passed through water. She didn't get it through drinking water. She got it through salad that had been washed with water that wasn't of drinking water standards. And I have to say, I came back from that experience very passionate about water quality and quantity, because it's a terrible thing to have a bucket bath only once a week.
I can imagine. That's really interesting. And John, how about you?
Well, my career started out in the oil and gas business. I had an undergrad in geology from U of S and then moved to Alberta here to work in the oil patch. And did so off and on for about 5 years. It was a very terrible time to be coming out, very much like we've just experienced over the last couple of years. But I persevered, and I really got interested in hydrodynamics and how water actually moves oil and gas underneath the surface, and that naturally led to an interest area in groundwater. And so I kind of shifted fluids in 1990 and went into the groundwater side of the business, environmental sciences. And I got my master's degree in hydrogeology, and followed on with a doctorate later, many years later, in geochemistry. But the one thing that really struck me and makes me passionate about water is making sure that people understand that this is, although it could arguably is a renewable resource, it's non-renewable in certain places. And I don't think really people appreciate what goes into this whole hydrologic system and how it's connected. I know we've all gone through our high school, and the most elegant thing to look at is the water cycle, because it shows how it's all connected. But we sometimes, as you pointed out, take it for granted. We turn on our taps very much like we like to, turn on our light switches. We expect the lights to come on. When we open up our taps, we want to see good, clean water. But there's a lot of stuff that's happening in between those mountains and where we're getting our water. And so education and awareness to me was really important. And this is why when the opportunity for me to become involved with the SAIT program and work with great people like Nisha and Candice and Pablo and others, I jumped on it, and I'm happy to be part of this and helping to raise awareness and work with students and work with Eco Canada and other agencies like this to bring the messages forward and get everybody on the same page.
Yeah, fantastic. My next question is for Nisha. So one of the skills you talked about was that understanding of different perspectives, and someone's asking, is any advice that you have on how to kind of build on that skill?
That's a good question. I think one of the most important things that we sometimes forget is being able to listen. It is an incredibly challenging thing to sometimes listen first and really, really try to understand someone's perspective prior to being able to communicate with them. And I think that really helps if you have that kind of initial skill set of being able to listen effectively, it really aids in being able to understand someone's values and beliefs better, and then have a stronger conversation with them. So that's one piece of advice I'd give.
Thank you.
Just to kind of jump in,
Yeah.
I know that question was for Nisha, but
Go
I just
for
want
it.
to emphasize that this is non-trivial. It's not easy to understand the other values. And in our SAIT program, for example, we have an entire course on the topic about water and society and learning about other people's values. And it's kind of a theme that kind of spreads through. This isn't something trivial. It's not, when it's listed as a soft skill, it's not like, oh, if you're a good listener, not that Nisha was implying that, but it's not just about like, oh, this is something I can pick up on my own. This is something actually quite serious. Learning about other people's perspectives and values, it's not intuitive. Some people have completely different perspectives, and it takes effort to learn about them.
Yeah, if I could add something too there, I mean, in that whole, system that you've talked about, keeping an open mind and listening to other people's points of views, and not assuming that you know everything. Yes, I've excelled in my educational career, but I don't know everything, and nor am I expected to, I hope. And I don't expect others to either. But when you're coming into a conversation, do it with information and knowledge, not opinion. Those don't go very well. I think you need to be able to have your points of view challenged, and you need to be able to back off if you're not you're not sure or you haven't researched it enough. I've been faced with that many times, and that is a problem in the scientific community sometimes, as you get married to your model, and sometimes when you're challenged on it, that is an invalidation, and you need to be able to step away from that. You need to have that pride.
Great advice there from all of our panelists. I think you're absolutely right. It's such a key skill, and it's something I think that you build as you go through your career as well. I have a question now for Candice about microplastics. Are they regulated in Canada? Someone would like to know.
Actually, that's a good question. I don't know. Nisha, do you know? Interestingly, Nisha's the one who teaches about it.
I do not think they're regulated yet. From what I understand, I know that there's been a lot. You'll see it in articles in Water Canada or things on their website, CWRA and all of those organizations. But I have not seen a guideline yet. I would imagine they're probably working on it, but it would, there's a lot that goes into these guidelines before they're actually brought forward. As you know, and Candice, you pointed it out that, I mean, how can contaminants be emerging contaminants for 20 years? That's why.
And just to add a little bit, it doesn't, there may not be regulations, but there's definitely a large amount of research going into this. And I think there's also individual water and wastewater treatment plants that are investing in, focusing on certain contaminants to see, can we address microplastics, for example. So there is some initiatives, but I agree there's no kind of overarching guideline at this point for Canada.
Yeah, research leads to regulation. I mean, regulation has to have some basis in reality. You can't just pick a number.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. Yeah, I know something when I'm buying products, trying to find if there's microplastics in there is sometimes really difficult. So yeah.
Be careful about tea bags, interestingly.
Really?
Yes.
Mm.
And denim jeans.
Yeah.
Fleece outfits too.
I feel like this is a whole new webinar.
There's no winning.
Pretty much everything that we manufactured in our world. Yes.
Yep. I have another question. I'm going to try and, I know we're a little bit over time, so I'm going to try and fit in a couple more questions if our panelists have time.
Sure. Yeah.
Question here from someone with an environmental degree but no experience in water management, and they're thinking of transitioning. What would a potential pathway look like for someone with that kind of background?
Nisha.
Okay. So that's awesome that you have an environmental degree. That's a great start. I think there's lots of different things you could do. You could do some informational interviews. So, just chat with people who might be in your network or who you think, you find interesting on LinkedIn who seem to work in water, and you can kind of talk to them about what their day-to-day job is or what their general interest in water is. You can also look into various, additional schooling. So, SAIT has a great program. There's lots of programs across Canada. There's also lots of free webinars like this one, and sorry, my dog's barking. Lots of online, really, awesome courses. So, yeah, that's where I'd start.
I look at it this way. I look at it as three things for success: what you like to do, what you're good at, and what has value. And if you can identify those things, you'll be successful. So you really need to look at what inspires you. What are you good at, right? What do you like to do? And if it has value, you're going to be successful. And so this is the kind of thing that we talk to our students about. Like, really think hard about what you like doing. Like, why did you get involved in this program? What inspires you? What are you passionate about? And if you hit those three things, you can't be unsuccessful.
And just to kind of build on both of them, and especially what Nisha, sorry, I keep pointing up because on my screen, Nisha's above me. To kind of build on what Nisha was saying about looking for like online courses and such, also short courses. So I know that most years, I don't think it's happening this year, and I know it didn't last year, there's electrofishing courses around some of the major urban centers in Canada. It might be an interesting way to get some water related skills on your CV, is to take short courses like that when they're available. Because if you already have that environmental background, what you want to do is kind of highlight on your CV that interest in water. So yes, doing something like taking taking something like an electrofishing course would kind of put that on your CV. Look, I'm interested in water. I've done something related to water.
And certainly getting involved in your local water stewardship groups or your watershed planning and advisory councils and things like that, like out here, that's a great way for networking, because networking is extremely important, and you never know what can come of that. Someone might see a spark in you and give you a chance. So, but you'll also get to hear from seasoned professionals and high potential upcoming young people and things like that that light bulb might go on for you.
That's something we talk about a lot on our webinars and with our members at EcoCanada, is that importance of networking and meeting the people in the field, because you just never know who you're going to meet and where that connection can take you in the future. I'm going to try and squeeze in 2 more questions. One for John about how far in advance do you think we can accurately predict weather systems on the prairies in order to kind of anticipate and plan and respond to severe events?
Weather, that's an easy one. Climate, that's a difficult one. But weather, because weather's not the same as climate, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You know, you're lucky if you can get 3 days out with an accurate weather forecast or projection, right? Because none of these are predictions. They're forecasts, which means they're modeled.
Yeah.
Projections are modeled, okay? And they're based, and models are based on information. So very much like you know, anything else, if it was, they were saying it was going to be sunny and 25 degrees Celsius today, and it was partly cloudy and 15, they didn't get it right. So they take the partly cloudy and 15 and they put it back into the model and forecast out again.
Yeah.
So as a general rule of thumb, I say, you know, today is what it is. Tomorrow is about 66% chance, and the next day is about 33, and after that, all bets are off. And particularly on the prairies, and particularly during times like now in June, when the weather patterns are redistributing themselves because the jet stream is moving again, and the ridges and the troughs are reestablishing themselves. Yeah, you know, once we get into more stable periods like August, it is more predictable, because then we start getting those blocking ridges, and we can get, you know, longer periods of sunny days, right? Same thing in the winter, you know.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'm going to ask one more question to all 3 panelists. And someone wants to know, what do you think the most important topic within the kind of water management field that needs research, that kind of needs development? What is the kind of one key issue that you feel is of utmost importance? And I don't know, do we want to start with Candice?
Oh, that's a terribly hard question. The thing is that the water management is just such a diverse field. It's just so big, and putting all these pieces together. Like, I would say, just because like I have a big heart, when I look at the map, I think that the biggest issue is flooding in Bangladesh with the different climate models going forward.
Yeah.
And maybe not just Bangladesh, but we've got areas of very high population density that are projected to have an increase in major floods and major events where people are very, very sensitive. And so, like, for me, for my heart, I would say that that's a terrible thing. And perhaps even worse is the increased projection of droughts in some areas where they already experience food shortages. So in Canada, we often make the joke that climate change is actually going to be good for us, that we're on the winter side. May or may not be true, but the idea of a warmer climate, you know, like, I'm not going to say no.
We certainly weren't saying that in 2013.
Yeah,
but,
I'm going to say,
you know,
but my garden, being able to grow tomatoes, actually grow them, that'd be a good thing. But if I'm looking at areas where they've already experienced a lot of difficulties, so we're looking like closer to the equator, that 1040 window, kind of like Niger. I lived in Niger for a little while. It's tragic when you see people actually starving around you, and that's going to increase. And so, like, in a way that's even worse than the floods, because it's a long drawn out depth. And so for me, those are my big issues.
Yeah, if I was gonna, I know we're talking about water today, but I can't disconnect that from the food and the energy systems, because they're all just interrelated. And my biggest concern and things of that nature is, have we reached the capacity of our planet yet? Some will say definitely, some will say no, we got a ways to go, and really we're dancing on an ice edge maybe. And we really, I don't know if we really understand what sustainability means. Is it achievable? And so these are things that are out there that we need to think about.
Yeah.
And they all influence each other. The climate is driving everything. And so I think what's really important is that we have to spend a lot more time integrating things versus disintegrating things.
Yeah.
And so programs like the SAIT program and others in Canada that are really trying to pull all the sciences and the engineering together are very, very important. That's where we need to focus a lot of effort, because education and awareness is going to make the difference.
Absolutely. Nisha, what about you?
So I think, everything that Candice and John have said, I would echo. I think one thing that, came to mind that is of concern to me is the safe and readily access to water for our Indigenous communities. I think that it's unacceptable that we have communities and people in Canada that don't have equal and safe access to drinking water and wastewater supplies,
Sanitation.
distribution systems and sanitation systems. And I think that we have, collectively as a society, a lot of work to do to find solutions that work for a variety of people and not just in one Western frame of thinking. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there, and I think it's a challenge and an issue that is still present to this day.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for presenting today and for sharing. From that last question, there are lots of challenges and kind of lots of work to be done, and it's reassuring to me that there are such wonderful professionals like the three of you in the sector willing to kind of share your experience and your passion with us today. So thank you so much to all of our speakers for the wonderful presentation.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody who took the time to watch.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Eco Canada, as well.
Thank you, and thanks to everybody on the line. If you would like to find out more, we'll be sending you this recording. If you want a copy of the slides in PDF, please email me at events@eco.ca, or the contact details for all of the SAIT team are on the slides when you get the recording. Don't hesitate to reach out, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure having our speakers, and I'll sign off there. Thanks, everyone.
See everybody.
Bye.